Hey everybody, Sawyer here. First off, I'd like to apologize for not putting out any videos recently. I've just I haven't been in the groove lately for putting out videos, and I apologize for that. We're gonna try to get back on track though. I'm gonna start doing a series here, top similar to my top five list, but for this one we're gonna go generation by generation, decade by decade, and we're gonna look at my top five favorite characters from each of those decades, starting with the 1930s. For this list, the character either, or for all the lists, the character has to be either established during that decade, or they have to be like, that has to be the decade where they had their highest point of impact on the media, on the medium. So, for example, a character like Punisher that was introduced in the 70s, but he really didn't get a lot of traction and become like a well-known, established character until like the 80s. Just for example on how that works. The 1930s were the early period of the comic books, where the first real true standalone original comic books didn't come out until the last couple of years of the decade. So some of these characters will be comic book strip characters and like pulp magazine characters, just because of the nature of this generation not having a whole lot of different characters. First off, we have Flash Gordon at number five. No, not the crappy. Well, it's kind of a fan favorite, but not the crappy '70s movie or whatever. No, we're talking about the original, gorgeous drawn comic strip from the 1930s. Flash Gordon is just kind of like a perfect example of the all-American, athlete, pretty boy character who's taken out of his environment and thrust to this intergalactic, sci-fi world where he is on a strange world. He's a stranger to the world, and he has to basically help liberate it from its evil dictator, Ming the Merciless. And there's just a lot of creativity in the stories and the art. The art's really the selling point. It's so gorgeous, so high quality for the time, and there's so many interesting characters and designs. You know, even like the artist behind the original Hawkman for DC Comics was very much inspired by Flash Gordon, especially the Hawkmen, which are a race of characters in the Flash Gordon universe that he took direct inspiration from. So yeah, definitely a very inspirational, iconic character for the median. Next up, we have the Phantom, the ghost that walks. Number four, I believe that's his tagline, right? The Phantom is, as far as I'm aware, and is the very first legacy hero. Which a legacy hero is basically a character that is that after they die, their kids take over, or somebody takes over the mantle, and the mantle never actually dies. The character never truly disappears. It's always someone to carry on the persona. And I mean, there might have been some like literary characters that have done that, but I think as far as like, characters in like modern, comic books, that's the first. The Phantom is the first one. The Phantom is such a cool character. He's just kind of a traditional crime fighter, but he fights in the jungle for the most part. The jungle is his terrain. That's his kingdom. He fights for his people. He has a whole like cave, society of people, and he's rich. He's kind of a mixture of a lot of things. He's a mixture of like Tarzan with some Batman in there, and also a little bit of like a tad bit of like Green Lantern. Just with the legacy kind of somebody always taking up the mantle aspect. So yeah, very much another very influential character for the whole series and comic books. Next in, crashing in at number three is Superman. Probably the most all-American hero there is, even though he's actually an alien from another planet, which has always been interesting. And he's created by two Jewish immigrants. So very much a very interesting coming to America story, like the classic coming to America immigrant story in superhero form. He's kind of a modern day Hercules. It's very just a great character, and he really opened the door. He opened the door for superpowered characters in general. Like at this time, there weren't very many, if any, superpowered characters in comic books or comic strips or pulp fiction. I mean, you had the Shadow who had kind of like mind powers, but that was never really very, closely defined as a superpower. It was just kind of something he did. Where this was more like obviously a superpower. Super strength, flight, or jumping. Large bounds. Just what can I say about Superman that people don't know already? He's just super. Next up, we have Doc Savage at number two, the Man of Bronze. If that sounds familiar, yes, Superman kind of stole it with the Man of Steel thing. A lot of stuff in this character has been borrowed or stolen, however you want to look at it, by other creators over the years. I mean, he had an Arctic base called the Fortress of Solitude. His team of best friends and like associates was called the Fantastic Four, or was it the Fantastic Five? Either way, obviously taken by Stan. Uh, there was just the Man of Bronze tagline, just a lot of things. He's very much a kind of a classic, Avenger type character. He's definitely inspiration for characters like Johnny Quest, Brock Sanson, and from Avenger Brothers, you know, Indiana Jones. Basically, any rugged, well-traveled, intellectual, but also a good fighter character. Doc Savage is the template for all those characters to come from. And he's just a really fun character, classic. Next up at number 1, we have the Batman, the Dark Knight himself. And I couldn't have picked a better picture. I've always loved this classic Golden Age look for Batman. I think the first couple of years of Batman stories are some of the best Batman stories ever told. This is before they really started establishing the rules for the character. So the character was much more morally gray. He was very much more interesting to me. Like sometimes he was actually killing people. He was throwing people off balconies. He was mowing down monsters with machine guns. I mean, his character was so much more dark and much more menacing back in the day. And it's just such an iconic character. He's a very tragic character. I think he's one of the first tragic superheroes that I can think of that's born out of tragedy, that's born out of darkness, and that kind of molded it into his own weapon, his own way of fighting against the darkness that he wants to take down. Really interesting character on so many levels. There's a lot of inspiration that Batman draws from. I mean, Zorro, the Bat, the Shadow, just a couple other ones, but it really is a very established character, very fun character. Very, very Dick Tracy, that's the one I was trying to think of. He takes from Dick Tracy. I mean, so many different characters. Alright guys, well that's all I have for this installment of Generational Heroes, or whatever I'm going to call this. Next up will be the 1940s, which is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a hard one to narrow down because there's so many good characters in that time period. Let me know in the comments what your favorite 1930s characters are. They can be pulp characters, they can be comic strip characters, or comic book characters. Just let me know in the comments, and see you guys later.